Okay, so in this video, I'm going to be discussing the concept of functionality and how it limits the scope of copyrightable subject matter, specifically in relation to what's come to be known as the useful articles doctrine. So the Copyright Act provides that specifically pictorial, graphic, and sculptural works, or PGS works, in other words, works that find their sort of primary embodiment in a three-dimensional or visual form, are copyrightable only insofar as they have original copyrightable elements, which does not include their mechanical or utilitarian aspects, or rather the aspects of an object that make it useful or functional. And essentially the idea there is that those elements of a product are appropriately protected by patent law because they are the kind of features of a product that we want to encourage through patent law, not the kinds of features that we want to encourage through copyright law, with a sort of subsidiary concern that providing protection for the functional or useful aspects of a product would undesirably constrain the ability of others to compete in the market for that particular product, especially if the feature in question is one that makes the product in question more desirable to consumers because it works better, not because of its aesthetic experience or the information that it communicates. So the idea is that copyright goes to the authorial elements of an article or of an object, not to the inventive elements of an article or object. The question is what that means in practice and how we're supposed to actually cash that out in relation to real products in the real world. After all, like so much of copyright doctrine, it's really easy to articulate in a kind of abstract way, but considerably more difficult to apply to actual practical circumstances and identify which elements of a object are in fact functional as opposed to being protectable by copyright. And sort of a classic articulation of the useful articles doctrine is Maser v. Stein. So what happened here, the Steins created a company that manufactured lamps in California in the late 40s. It was known as Reglor of California. And essentially it was like a mix and match lamp company. They had a range of different bases you could choose. And then you chose your base, you chose your shade, and they did essentially assemble a lamp for you based on the choices that you made. And this is really popular, right? And in particular, they use a material known as chalkware, which was a kind of ceramic product, which was relatively inexpensive for them to produce, was easily sculpted, and enabled them to produce a lot of these lamps in this very, well now kitschy looking kind of Art Deco sort of style. Sometimes people call it mid-century modern. Maybe, okay. Well, we agree to disagree on the proper characterization of the style of the products in question. In any case, Maser operated a competing lamp company. He saw how successful the Steins had become with this broad range of lamps that they were selling, and started making copies of the Steins lamps and offering them to consumers. They brought an infringement action against Maser, and his response was, I can't be an infringer, these are lamps, right? Lamps are functional objects. You can't have a copyright over a functional object that's a useful article. A lamp is a useful article. It lights up the room, after all, right? So that's useful article, can't be the subject of copyright protection. So you lose, right? A lamp is non-functional without a lamp base. You're trying to claim protection over lamp bases. this is not how it works, right? You can't claim protection in that way. And ultimately, the Supreme Court disagreed. And it said, so long as an element of a product is separable from the useful aspect of the product itself, then that aspect can still be copyrightable. And so it looked at the Stein's lamps and said, well, you know, the base is manufactured separately from the lamp as a whole. And if you didn't put all the lamp elements in, it would just be a sculpture. So on that level, it's physically separable from the lamp itself, right? It exists before there's a lamp there. It's like a part of a lamp, not the lamp as a whole. And what's more, it's conceptually severable to the extent that you can imagine the base taking any number of different shapes, and the appearance of the base doesn't affect the functionality of the lamp, right? The important thing is the lamp has a base, not that it has any particular base. Therefore, the Supreme Court said, yeah, this lamp base is protectable by copyright, just like any other sculpture would be. It's just a sculpture, so copyright can protect sculptures. There's no problem in protecting a sculpture that happens to also be something that you can use as a lamp base. Okay, well, it seems pretty straightforward, but it turns out it can get pretty difficult to apply in practice, especially this kind of metaphysical distinction between physical and conceptual separability. Like in some circumstances, that's really easy, right? You have a t-shirt with an image on the t-shirt. Well, the image on the t-shirt is easy to conceive of separate from the t-shirt itself. After all, it could be an image not on a t-shirt, but on a canvas or on a piece of paper or projected on the wall or anywhere else, right? It doesn't need the t-shirt in order to be the same image. But in many cases, it can be hard to sort of disaggregate the claimed protected element from the physical object itself, especially when they start to merge together. Right, so maybe we start to see some of these other copyright doctrines start to inform the way we might think about the useful articles doctrine and sort of help us conceptualize, as it were, what the useful article doctrine is trying to do. So some other examples, right? There was a well-known case that a court decided involving a distinctive buckle that had been developed by the Kieselstein cord company. And the question was the buckle design something that could be protected? And the response was, well, no, I mean, like it has to have a design in order to be protectable. Court says, yeah, but a buckle just has to have the functionality of a buckle. It doesn't have to look like this particular buckle. And the things that are protected about this buckle are the aspects of the buckle that don't play any role in its functionality as a buckle. They only play a role in the appearance of the buckle, which is what people are attracted to this particular buckle by, apparently. I guess it was the 80s. What do you want? But it didn't have to have this particular shape. So that's separable. That's conceptually separable from the physical buckle as a whole. What does it mean to conceptualize the shape of the buckle apart from the physical buckle itself? Well, it's a little bit like imagining a grin without a cat, perhaps, but you can imagine a buckle that doesn't have some of these distinctive features. And I guess the idea is, well, if you can imagine a really simple buckle, then a more complicated buckle could be protectable. By contrast, the Carol Barnhart case involved mannequins or mannequin torsos, and the company was claiming copyright ownership over the particular shape of the mannequin torsos. And ultimately the court said, no, the reason that they have this particular shape is because it plays a role in the functionality of the mannequin torso as it's intended to be used for displaying clothes. Now, obviously the expected response would be, well, any sculpture is going to have the shape of a human body. So if there's an infinite variety or really wide variety anyway, shapes that human bodies can take, then mannequins can have lots of different shapes too. And, you know, the fact that it happens to have this particular shape doesn't preclude there being other shapes that would also be possible and therefore separately protectable and giving plenty of alternative options. I suspect part of the problem here was the idea that while it's true that there's multiple shapes that a mannequin torso can have, there's some pretty significant limitations on the range of commercially viable mannequin torso shapes. And so essentially what they've done is make a mannequin torso in a shape and size that was particularly attractive to their customer base because it modeled the kind of torso that their kind of ideal customer or aspirational customer perhaps was hoping to embody, right? So theoretically really broad range, practically speaking, maybe not such a broad range after all. Okay, alternative circumstances, a really interesting case here. So in Randir v. Cascade, an artist, he was primarily made like wire sculptures and so on, created an undulating wire sculpture. And a friend of mine who was an avid cyclist saw the sculpture, a small sculpture, and said, hey, if you made that larger, it would make for a really useful bike rack, right? Because you could lock bikes in each of those undulating curves, be very economical and attractive. Bike rack, cheap to make and effective and holding a lot of bicycles. So great bike rack. They go to a manufacturer, figure out what the sort of most efficient way of manufacturing a bike rack in this shape is going to be and start producing and selling a whole bunch of these bike racks, which get a bunch of design awards, super popular. Everyone thinks it's a great design. Well, Cascade starts selling their own version. So Randir refers to theirs as the ribbon rack. Cascade creates the original Cycloops rack. It's not all that original, given that it's pretty clearly a direct copy of the ribbon rack. And Randir's not happy about this, right? They've got a competitor horning in on their market. They bring an infringement action, and Cascade's response is, hey, this is not a copyrightable work of authorship. Right? This is functional. The reason it takes this particular design is because this is the most functional design. It makes it work best as a bike rack, and it also makes it the least expensive kind of iteration of this particular design to produce. What you're trying to claim is ownership of the functional aspects of both the use and manufacturing of the rack in question. And that's something that copyright doesn't permit. And the Second Circuit ultimately agrees, saying that the Randir rack, while a great design, is not a copyrightable design. Now, one might question, right, is this really about the functionality of the bike rack in question, or is it really about whether it includes any original elements that can be protected by copyright, irrespective of the functionality exception or the useful articles doctrine? The Second Circuit sort of frames it in a functionality way, but maybe it could also be decided on a more traditional copyrightable subject matter grounds. After all, it's a pretty minimalistic design. Is that the kind of thing that copyright can and should protect? Now, most recently, the Supreme Court revisited the useful articles doctrine, arguably not in the most helpful fashion, in the Star Athletica v. Varsity Brands case. So what happened there? Varsity Brands and Star Athletica are both companies that manufacture cheerleading uniforms. Varsity Brands went and got copyright registrations on a bunch of its designs. How did it do that? By submitting photographs and drawings of the cheerleading uniform designs in question. And then it brought infringement actions against Star Athletica, saying your designs are too close to ours and therefore you're an infringer. And look, we have copyright registrations showing that you're not allowed to do this, that these are protected designs. And the response that was litigated to the Supreme Court from Star Athletica was, we don't even have to defend this. These are not copyrightable in the first place, right? So there's a long-standing rule that clothing qua clothing is not copyrightable. So Star Athletica just said, hey, cheerleading uniforms are clothing. Clothing's not copyrightable. Therefore, you can't copyright these designs because these are just designs for the shape of the clothing, ergo not copyrightable, ergo no claim. And ultimately, the Supreme Court, in a very split decision, disagrees with Star Athletica and takes the sides of Varsity Brands, saying, we're looking at pictures here. Copyright can protect pictures. If it's a picture of a cheerleading uniform, then that's protectable by copyright. You know, we see designs here. The designs are protectable. This is not clothing. This is an image of clothing, and an image of anything is potentially protectable. Therefore, there could be copyrightable subject matter. And notably, the Supreme Court didn't say that the designs in question were actually copyright protected or that there was any infringement, right? The only question posed was, could the designs potentially be protected? But there was a pretty spirited dissent from Justice Breyer, joined by some other justices, arguing that this isn't the right way to think about copyright protection. If we want to think about separability, you know, if separability matters for the useful articles doctrine, then these designs aren't separable from the cheerleading uniforms themselves. Sure, they are pictures of cheerleading uniforms, but making a picture of something shouldn't be the basis for asserting copyright protection of the thing itself. The only thing that should be protectable is the original elements that might be associated with it. Now, after Star Athletica, is there anything left of the useful articles doctrine? Kind of unclear. I guess we'll have to have a conversation about that and see if we can't figure it out.